My name is Grace, but people call me Gracie, and I'm 71. I never imagined I'd feel this kind of heartbreak at my age. I drove 700 miles overnight, my car packed with suitcases, a box of carefully wrapped gifts, and a copy of Olivia's wedding invitation I'd kept tucked in my bag like a talisman. I pictured her face when she opened the door, the surprise, the joy, maybe even tears. That was what mothers live for, isn't it? But when the door swung open, the person staring back at me wasn't my little girl, the one I held in my arms through fevers and nightmares. It was a stranger. Olivia blinked, her lips pressing into a thin line, and she said, flat as ice, "I'm sorry, Mom." "I didn't know you were coming." The words hit me like a slap. My hand still gripping the suitcase handles, I felt the blood drain from my face. And then, behind her, Ethan appeared, the picture of calm, that fake smile I'd never trusted. "She thinks $63,000 guarantees your presence here," he said, as if I were some sort of investor rather than the mother who'd given everything. The suitcase at my feet suddenly felt heavier. I glanced down at the wedding invitation in my hand, my old photo of Olivia in her first recital tucked inside. Symbols of a lifetime of love and sacrifice, reduced to paper and money. My chest ached. I realized, in that instant, I was no longer a mother in their eyes. I was a transaction. A walking checkbook. I still remember the day her father left, though Olivia was only 8. I had just returned from a double shift at the diner, exhausted and smelling faintly of coffee and grease. The living room was empty except for a note on the kitchen counter, "I'm gone. Don't wait for me." My heart sank, but my first thought was not of anger. It was of my little girl. I had to be both mother and father, guardian and cheerleader, nurse and counselor. That night, I held Olivia close, telling her stories of princesses who overcame every obstacle. I promised her we would be fine, and we were in ways I never imagined. Raising her alone was no small feat. I worked 12-hour shifts at the diner, picked up odd cleaning jobs on weekends, anything that would pay the bills and keep food on the table. There were nights I slept sitting up in the recliner just to be sure Olivia was tucked in safely beside her small, worn teddy bear. The first time she asked for piano lessons, I thought, we can't afford it. But I found a way, scrimping on groceries and skipping my own small pleasures because giving her the chance to flourish was worth it. I sold my old car to pay for a used piano. I mortgaged the house to cover her college tuition. I even gave up my own dreams of travel, of leisure, of late-night movies, to make sure she could have hers. I bought her first apartment after graduation, paying the deposit and furnishing it with second-hand but cherished items. When she got her first car, I insisted on handling the payments for her, just as I had for everything else, because she should never feel the burden I carried. When Olivia met Ethan 3 years ago, I thought I had finally reached a new chapter of joy. I remember the first dinner he joined us for. I had baked her favorite apple pie, thinking it would be a warm gesture. Ethan smiled, shook my hand with a polite firmness, and spoke in that calm, measured tone that I would later realize was his way of controlling every room he entered. He complimented me on the pie and the house, then subtly began planting ideas in Olivia's head. "Mom just wants to help, but maybe you need your own space," he said one night, leaning casually on the doorway. "It's time to live for yourselves." At the time, I didn't think much of it, just a young man trying to be diplomatic. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he started inserting himself between us, isolating her affection and attention. At first, the changes were tiny. Olivia started taking longer to return my calls. She stopped sharing small daily triumphs with me. The texts became infrequent, polite, but distant. "Your mom worries too much," Ethan said, as if he were a mediator rather than a manipulator. "You need your own life." And I, trusting my daughter's judgment, told myself it was natural. People grow apart, children become independent, parents fade into the background. I've always been the giving type. Generosity isn't just a habit, it's a point of pride. I never expected thanks or acknowledgement. When I handed her a car key or signed tuition checks, my reward was watching her eyes light up, seeing her possibilities expand. So, when she and Ethan mentioned the wedding, when they asked me if I could help fund it, I didn't hesitate. $63,000. Almost every penny of my retirement savings. A mortgage on my security for a day I hoped would be magical for her. "Mom," she said, eyes brimming, "we want everything perfect. You've always been so generous." "We'll pay you back, I promise." I smiled through the tears. How could I refuse my own daughter? Even then, a small whisper of doubt lingered. It was subtle. Ethan's suggestion that it was only practical for me to fund the wedding, Olivia's vague hesitations about sharing details of the plans. I brushed it off. I told myself love required sacrifice, and I had sacrificed everything for her before. Surely this would be no different. Over the next months, I pored over wedding details from afar, despite the 700 miles between us. I sent contributions for dresses, decorations, and gifts. I saved the receipts, tucked them carefully into a folder labeled Olivia's Wedding, alongside photographs of her childhood, her first recital, graduation, prom night. Each photo a reminder of the life I had built for her. Each dollar spent a symbol of love, not obligation. The folder became my talisman, a small shrine of devotion and hope. Ethan, however, was always present in subtle ways I barely noticed at first. He'd question choices politely but firmly. "Are you sure you want to spend that much on centerpieces? Maybe something simpler?" Or he'd comment on Olivia's time with me. "She's with her mother too much. She needs her own space." These statements seemed innocuous, almost caring, until I noticed the pattern. My daughter's laughter and enthusiasm waning whenever I called or visited. The distance between us was no longer natural growth, it was being orchestrated. I tried to tell myself that my daughter's happiness mattered most. That I had built her a life where she could thrive independently, where financial contributions, guidance, and presence were appreciated, even if not explicitly acknowledged. But by the time the wedding invitations were finalized, I sensed something unspoken. Olivia's life was now aligned with Ethan, not with me. And the first hint of real alarm came when he suggested seating arrangements, subtly excluding me from key events. I convinced myself it was still practical, logistical, but an uneasy knot tightened in my chest. The stakes had grown dangerously high. My retirement, my security, my very presence, all tied to $63,000. And yet, I believed, blindly, that love and blood would transcend money. That my daughter would recognize the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights, the financial burdens, the unending devotion. My heart told me I had done everything right, that she would never treat me like a stranger. I looked at the folder of photos and receipts one last time before I began the drive. My suitcase in the trunk, the wedding invitation clutched tightly. I traced Olivia's smiling face with my finger in one of the recital photos. "Soon," I whispered. "Soon I'll be there. I'll see her joy, and it will all be worth it." But in the back of my mind, a small, persistent shadow lingered, one that whispered that perhaps, this time, love and sacrifice might not be enough. I remember the day I transferred the $63,000 like it was etched in my memory with fire. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen of my laptop, my hands trembling slightly. This was my life savings, the nest egg I had painstakingly built over decades of work, late nights, and careful budgeting. But all I could see in my mind was Olivia, radiant in her dress, walking down the aisle, and I told myself that this was worth every cent. Ethan had called during the transfer, his voice polite, but with that undertone I had never liked. "Grace," he said, "since you're covering the wedding, you'll obviously be in the front row. We couldn't imagine it without you." At the time, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. The front row. Of course I would be there. How could I not? I was her mother. I was the one who had given everything for her, and I was proud to do it again. I imagined the smiles, the tears of joy, the proud moment of seeing her married. But even then, a small chill ran down my spine, the tiniest flicker of unease that perhaps Ethan saw this more like a transaction than a celebration. I brushed it aside. Love demanded faith. The drive to her house was brutal. 700 miles, through rain and dark highways, the hum of tires on asphalt blending with my racing thoughts. I arrived at 6 in the morning, suitcases packed in the trunk, gifts and wedding programs tucked carefully inside. My heart was full. I rehearsed the words I would say when I saw her, the embrace I would give, the pride I would feel. But when Olivia opened the door, the reaction I had expected never came. She blinked at me, her lips tight, her eyes wide, not with joy, but with something that felt like hesitation. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I didn't know you were coming." The words struck me harder than any blow could. The careful planning, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the money, it all collapsed into a single moment of stark reality. My chest ached. My hands fell to my sides, gripping the worn handles of my suitcase as if it could anchor me in the world I had known. And then Ethan appeared, stepping casually behind her, that same calm, practiced smile plastered across his face. "Grace," he said, smooth as glass, "the ceremony is very intimate, just close family." His words were precise, calculated. Close family. As if I wasn't included, as if blood and decades of devotion were irrelevant. I glanced around the room, taking in the carefully arranged chaos. Olivia in a pale pink robe, her hair pinned and face slightly flushed from preparation. Wedding invitations stacked neatly on the counter, each one a reminder of plans made without me. A seating chart lying on the table, meticulously calculated to exclude me. My eyes fell on a framed photo from her first recital, still on the mantel, a symbol of a lifetime of love and work, now overshadowed by exclusion and cold precision. My mind raced. How could this be happening? The money, the hours, the effort. It had been seen not as a gift of love, but as a ticket, a guarantee of presence. I had been monetized. I was a transaction, an investment, a line item in a ledger that I had thought was irrelevant to my daughter. The betrayal twisted inside me, a sharp, cold knot that made me shiver. I'm here, Olivia," I said softly, my voice breaking. "I'm your mother." "I've always been your mother." But the words sounded hollow even to me. She looked away, busying herself with a bouquet, a brush, a ribbon, anything to avoid acknowledging me. Ethan's calm presence loomed over us, controlling, silent, but powerful, a reminder that I was now irrelevant in the very moment I had dreamed of for so long. And in that instant, as I set down my suitcase and looked at the pink robe, the neatly stacked invitations, and the calculated seating chart, I realized the truth. My sacrifices had been monetized, my devotion reduced to dollars, my love treated as a commodity. And for the first time, I felt the bitter sting of complete, shocking exclusion from the life I had built and the daughter I had raised. After that morning, I felt unmoored, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. I couldn't understand it. How could my daughter, the girl I raised from infancy, act as if I were a stranger? I wandered around the quiet house, my eyes lingering on small objects that once symbolized our connection. The photo of her first birthday, a faded pink ribbon from her ballet recital, the wedding invitations carefully stacked on the counter, each one addressed with meticulous precision, and none of them acknowledging my place in the ceremony. I needed answers. I started by calling her old neighbors, women I had known for decades, who had watched Olivia grow. They spoke politely, offering vague reassurances, but their words carried hints I couldn't ignore. "Olivia seems so different these days," one neighbor said. "I don't see her mother as much anymore." Another mentioned seeing Ethan guiding Olivia's decisions, what flowers to buy, who to invite, how to schedule the bridal shower. Every casual observation they offered felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized existed. I found myself rifling through drawers, searching for clues Ethan might have overlooked. A notebook with planning notes, tucked beneath a stack of wedding invitations, revealed more than I expected. In neat, precise handwriting were names, schedules, and instructions, some crossed out, some highlighted, some never shared with me. My heart sank as I realized that Ethan had orchestrated nearly every detail, carefully omitting me at every turn. He had hidden the seating chart, arranged vendors without consultation, and even selected gifts for my contributions, directing them away from the people I had hoped to surprise. Each page was a quiet testament to control, to deliberate exclusion. As I sifted through these papers, memories surged unbidden. I remembered the first time Olivia rode a bike without training wheels, how she had wobbled and screamed, and how I had chased her down the street, arms outstretched, until she toppled into my embrace. I remembered her first scraped knee, the feverish nights we spent side by side, the long afternoons spent teaching her to read and tie her shoes. I had been there for every triumph, every setback, every small miracle of her life. And now she was barely present, her priorities rewritten by a man I had once considered polite, now revealed as controlling. The tension within me grew. I tried calling Olivia, gently probing, asking if there had been misunderstandings, if I had somehow misread the planning. Her voice was polite but distant. "Mom, Ethan and I wanted a very small, intimate wedding," she said. "We've taken care of everything. It's all planned." Planned. Not spontaneous, not joyous, not familial planned. The word cut like a knife. She was repeating the same phrases Ethan used, as if rehearsed, echoing the manipulation I had glimpsed in the notes. I began looking closer at the gifts I had sent, each wrapped carefully, each chosen to delight. Some had been redirected books and trinkets meant for her bridesmaids never reached them. A necklace I had picked out for Olivia's maid of honor was tucked in a drawer, forgotten, while Ethan controlled the flow of everything else. Even the flowers I had paid for had been arranged to minimize my contribution. The centerpiece display moved to a corner, unseen by most. The evidence was everywhere. Every gesture I had made, every dollar I had spent, every ounce of love had been subtly diverted, rendered invisible. At night, lying on the couch in their guest room, I replayed decades of devotion, trying to reconcile it with the present. The emotional rupture was nearly physical. My loyalty to my daughter warred with my moral outrage at manipulation. I felt rage, yes, but beneath it was something sharper, a profound, aching betrayal. She was not the child I had nurtured. She was someone molded, carefully, by a man who had claimed authority over her heart and mind. And yet, amidst the rising tension, a stubborn, defiant hope flickered. I thought of the photographs of her recital, the first dance, the messy birthday cakes, the diplomas I had framed and hung on the wall. These were not artifacts, they were symbols, reminders of a bond that could not be erased by distance or deceit. If Ethan thought he could rewrite my place in Olivia's life, he was mistaken. The fight for recognition, for love, for justice had only begun. I began documenting everything, every note, every invitation, every discrepancy between what I had contributed and what was acknowledged. The folder of wedding receipts, once a quiet shrine of hope, now became a record of omission, of deliberate erasure. I photographed seating charts, noted missing acknowledgments, traced every deviation from the plans we had once discussed together. Each symbolic object, the invitations, the gifts, the notes, told the same story. I had been quietly sidelined, reduced from mother to outsider. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Ethan's influence was nearly absolute. Olivia, it seemed, had begun mirroring him. Her once bright laughter now tinged with hesitation, her eyes avoiding mine when conversation drifted toward wedding details, her voice repeating phrases I had never spoken. She was no longer fully present, her identity quietly reshaped by him, and I was forced to confront the horrifying truth. My daughter's heart was being guided, manipulated, and hidden from me. Every day, the tension mounted. I moved like a ghost through the house, observing small interactions, watching Ethan's subtle dominance. His calm, measured gestures, the way he handed her a coffee, the way he checked his phone before replying to her questions, the way he smiled at me in that polite, controlled way, reminded me that the battle would not be easy. Yet, with every hidden note I discovered, every redirected gift I found, I felt a spark of determination. I would not be erased. I would reclaim my place, even if the cost was my own comfort, my own emotional exhaustion. By the time the rehearsal dinner approached, I had pieced together enough evidence to understand the scope of the manipulation. Every interaction, every exclusion, every whispered instruction was deliberate. Ethan was orchestrating her life, reshaping her priorities, and I was witnessing the slow unraveling of the bond I had fought decades to preserve. The symbolic objects, the invitations, the notes, the gifts, stood as markers of my love and his interference. And in the quiet moments when I traced my fingers over the old photographs and wedding receipts, I silently vowed I would not let this stand, not for Ethan. Not for Olivia, not for myself. I had spent days piecing together the subtle exclusions, Ethan's quiet control, and Olivia's distant behavior, But the truth hit me like a hammer the moment I discovered the first undeniable proof. It was tucked between the folds of a wedding planner's notebook, a small slip of paper that could have been overlooked. On it, in neat, precise handwriting, Olivia's handwriting, was a message to Ethan. Mom will expect to be included, but the front row idea makes her feel entitled. Keep her peripheral. She'll understand when it's too late. I dropped the paper, my fingers trembling as disbelief and horror battled inside me. Not only had Ethan been orchestrating the ceremony, deliberately excluding me, but my own daughter had consented. She had planned to sideline me from her wedding, and the money I had given, $63,000, nearly everything I had saved, was part of the motivation. It wasn't just about funding the wedding, it was a tool, a lever, a justification to push me aside. I picked up the wedding seating chart, spread across the dining table. My name was nowhere to be seen. Not in the front row, not in the second, not even as an afterthought. RSVPs were organized meticulously, and my name had been omitted entirely. I realized then that the room I had imagined myself entering, filled with smiles, tears, and pride, had never been intended for me. I was not a guest. I was an invisible presence, a mother erased. The emotional blow was staggering. Ethan had manipulated her, yes, but Olivia had actively chosen to go along with it. Betrayal is one thing when it comes from an outsider, but when it comes from your own child, it cuts through you in ways that leave no comforting layer. I sat down, hands covering my face, and felt a cold emptiness settle in my chest. I had raised her to cherish love and family, to value connection over convenience. And yet, here she was, prioritizing calculation over blood, appearances over affection. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, the double shifts, the sleepless nights, the mortgage, the tuition, the apartment, the car. Every penny, every hour, every act of devotion reduced to a line on a ledger, a transaction to be acknowledged or ignored at someone else's discretion. My life had been invested in her happiness, and now I saw that it had been exploited. A strange, cold clarity replaced the shock. I could feel it in my bones. I would not be ignored. I would not be erased. I began to plan my response, carefully, deliberately, like a strategist preparing for the endgame. I thought of the photo albums I had brought with me, the old recital ribbons, the gifts still tucked in my car, the wedding invitation in my pocket. Each symbolic object became a weapon in my mind, a testament to my love, my sacrifices, my presence that could not be denied. I revisited every small moment that had felt off in the past months, Olivia's hesitant responses to my calls, her sudden cancellations of video chats, her vaguely scripted expressions of gratitude. Everything now had context. Ethan had been the architect, yes, but Olivia had been the willing apprentice. My heart ached with grief, but beneath it was steel, a determination to confront this orchestrated betrayal. I imagined standing in that room, my presence undeniable, my voice firm, my dignity intact. I pictured presenting the evidence subtly, letting the proof speak louder than tears or anger. I imagined their faces when confronted with the truth, that love and blood cannot be erased, that sacrifices cannot be bought off, that a mother's devotion is not a negotiable commodity. For the first time since I began this journey, I felt a surge of control, a sense of purpose. The betrayal had carved a space inside me, sharp and hollow, but it had also forged a resolve I had never known. I would not crumble under manipulation. I would not allow my daughter or anyone to diminish my presence, my worth, or my role in her life. As I held the seating chart, staring at my omitted name, I whispered to myself, "This ends differently. I will be seen. I will be acknowledged, and I will reclaim the dignity they thought they could take from me." The days leading up to the wedding were a minefield. Every interaction, every glance, every carefully orchestrated detail reminded me that I had been sidelined. At the rehearsal, I arrived early, suitcase in hand, heart full of hope, expecting at least a nod of inclusion, a simple acknowledgement that I was the mother of the bride. Instead, I was met with polite indifference. Ethan led the rehearsal like a general commanding a parade, directing every step, every gesture, and subtly ensuring that I remained in the periphery. Olivia, for her part, followed his lead. Her eyes flickered to me only occasionally, and each time I felt the sharp sting of distance. I tried to speak, offering a suggestion about the flower placement, the music transitions, or the reading order. Each time, Ethan responded with gentle but firm dismissal. "Thanks, Grace." "We've got it handled," he said, that controlled smile in place. Olivia nodded silently behind him, her expression carefully neutral. The flowers I had purchased, the ones I had imagined lining the aisle in delicate pink and white, were shifted to side tables, almost invisible. My contributions were rendered unseen, unappreciated, and strategically minimized. I spent those moments in quiet fury, my mind oscillating between disbelief and anger. How could this be happening? I had spent decades giving, sacrificing, and nurturing, yet here I was, reduced to a peripheral observer at the one event that symbolized her transition into her own life. And the humiliation wasn't just private, it was public. Every photographer's lens, every bridesmaid's glance felt like a reminder that I was being written out of her story. I reflected on the countless sacrifices I had made, working double shifts, mortgaging my home, financing college and apartments, buying her first car. Every act of love had been selfless, and yet now they had been monetized and weaponized against me. Each thought sharpened my resolve rather than weakening me. I could feel my anger building, but I forced it down into a simmering, controlled determination. I would not react in a way that could be dismissed as melodrama. I would act with dignity, precision, and purpose. Ethan's manipulations became more overt with each passing day. He directed conversations, decided who would sit where, and controlled the flow of information. Even Olivia, my once open-hearted daughter, now mirrored his behavior. She repeated his phrases, mimicked his tone, and deferred to him in ways that made my heart ache. I caught myself studying the smallest interactions, the way he placed a napkin just so, the way she handed over a gift I had purchased to someone else without a word of acknowledgement. It was subtle, but deliberate. I realized then that I was facing a united front, both orchestrated and unwitting, designed to keep me sidelined. But amidst the frustration, I clung to the small victories. I organized my own notes, meticulously documenting everything I had contributed. I kept photographs of my gifts, the receipts of the floral arrangements, and the wedding programs I had printed. Even the ring box I had purchased, meant to be a meaningful token for Olivia, had been set aside, unnoticed by anyone except me. These objects, once simple tools of celebration, now became symbols of my presence, my investment, and my claim to recognition. During quiet moments, I allowed myself to reflect on what was fair. Was it unreasonable to expect acknowledgement at my daughter's wedding? Had I been naive to believe that love alone could secure my place? My inner monologue was a constant battle. Loyalty to Olivia's happiness warred with moral outrage at the manipulation. I grieved for the child I had raised, whose warmth had been gradually replaced by the coldness of calculated control. Yet beneath the grief, a spark of defiance began to grow. I began to plan my confrontation carefully. It could not be haphazard, it could not be angry or reactive. I would need to assert my presence in a way that could not be dismissed, that forced recognition of both my contributions and my role as her mother. Every evening, I rehearsed quietly in the mirror, imagining how I would speak, where I would stand, and how I would let the evidence, the seating chart, the gifts, the programs, the photographs, do part of the work for me. I even started to time my actions in my mind, when I would arrive, how I would engage the vendors, when I would place myself in the line of sight for family members. The pink flowers I had purchased would be repositioned if necessary. The ring box would be visible. Everything became a symbol, a tangible assertion of presence. I realized that my dignity was my strongest weapon, unshakable, unwavering, and undeniable. And yet, the tension built like a storm ready to break. Each small injustice being ignored at rehearsal, watching my gifts minimized, seeing Olivia mirror Ethan's cold precision added fuel to a fire I had never known. I forced myself to remain composed, to walk with grace and measured steps, but inside, my resolve hardened. I was not just defending a spot at a wedding, I was defending decades of love, sacrifice, and the irreplaceable bond between mother and daughter. By the night before the ceremony, I felt ready. The anger had transformed into quiet, calculated determination. I had traced every omission, documented every slight, and rehearsed every word I would speak. The symbolic objects I had brought, programs, flowers, ring box, photographs, would be arranged to assert my presence without fanfare, without begging for recognition. I was no longer a passive participant in this story. I was preparing to step forward, fully aware of the stakes, fully aware of the opposition, and fully resolved to reclaim what had been mine from the start. As I lay in bed that night, exhausted yet resolute, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, they will see me. They will not be able to ignore me. I will stand for myself, for my love, and for the decades of devotion they have tried to erase." And with that, a strange calm settled over me, a readiness I had never felt before. The stage was set, and I was prepared for what was coming. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I felt a tension in my chest that no amount of deep breaths could dissipate. The house was alive with movement, bridesmaids adjusting dresses, florists placing the last arrangements, photographers capturing details that would be frozen in time. Every detail had been orchestrated by Ethan. I could see it in the precise angles of the centerpieces, the exact placement of chairs, and the subtle ways Olivia moved through the room, mirroring his composure. Yet I carried with me a quiet determination, a conviction that today my presence and my truth would be undeniable. I carried the folder of evidence with me, photographs from Olivia's childhood, receipts for every wedding contribution I had made, copies of emails and notes documenting Ethan's manipulations, and the seating chart with my name deliberately omitted. Each item felt heavy in my hands, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented: decades of devotion, countless sacrifices, and the relentless love of a mother. The suitcases, gifts, and flowers I had brought became extensions of my presence, symbols that could not be ignored. I approached Olivia first, finding her in the bridal suite, her pink robe still hugging her frame, hair pinned neatly, makeup flawless. She looked up at me with the same polite but distant expression I had seen for months. "Mom," she said softly, everything's ready. It's just going to be a small, intimate ceremony." I placed the folder on the counter in front of her, opening it to reveal receipts, notes, and photographs. "Olivia," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, "this is what your father never saw, what I worked for every day for 30 years. These are the sacrifices I made for you. The sleepless nights, the apartments, the tuition, the car, every single cent, every ounce of effort." I let my eyes meet hers, searching for a flicker of recognition, of the little girl who had once clung to me through fevers and scraped knees. Her face tightened, and I saw Ethan enter the room, his smile calm but slightly guarded. "Grace," he said smoothly, "we've explained everything. You've been generous, but the ceremony has been planned to be intimate. We're just asking you to respect our wishes." I inhaled slowly, letting the frustration and heartbreak simmer beneath the surface. "Respect your wishes?" I asked, voice rising just enough to command attention. "Do you know what it takes to respect the life of a mother? Do you understand that you have deliberately sidelined me from the wedding of my own daughter? That the very money I gave, $63,000, was treated as a tool to justify my exclusion?" Ethan's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. "Grace, you're overreacting. It's not personal." "Not personal?" I echoed, my tone sharp, precise. "You've orchestrated this entire event, omitted my name from the seating chart, redirected my contributions, and manipulated Olivia into mirroring your every instruction. And she, my daughter, has agreed to it. This isn't misunderstanding, it's calculated." At that, Olivia flinched, her eyes flicking down to the folder. She opened a page and froze. I could see it in her expression. The evidence was undeniable. My receipts, the emails, the notes, all proof that Ethan had guided her choices, hidden details from me, and excluded me deliberately. She looked up at me, confusion and guilt mingling in her gaze. "Mom," she began, but I cut her off gently, though firmly. "Olivia, don't speak, just look. See what has been done, and understand that love is not a transaction. It cannot be bought, redirected, or minimized." Ethan's composure faltered further. "Grace," he said, trying to regain control, "this is all blown out of proportion. You need to step back. I will not step back, I replied, lifting the photo of Olivia's first recital from the folder. I will not step back from the life I built with my daughter. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every financial strain, I will not be erased. I held the photograph high, letting it catch the morning light filtering through the window. It was a symbol, a tangible representation of decades of love. At that moment, several of the bridesmaids and a few relatives who had been quietly observing began to gather near the doorway. Their expressions shifted from polite curiosity to quiet recognition. One of Olivia's aunties stepped forward holding a copy of a wedding planning note she had received from Ethan, noting the deliberate exclusions. "Is this true?" she asked, voice trembling with disbelief. "Grace, these notes, they show everything you've done and how you've been pushed aside." Ethan's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. Olivia's hands trembled as she looked at the folder again, shame and guilt washing over her face. The room had shifted. I could feel it. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer peripheral. My sacrifices, my love, my place in my daughter's life, all undeniable. I turned to Olivia, letting my voice soften but remain firm. "You were never meant to see this day with me at your side, not without a fight. But I am your mother, and nothing, not money, not manipulation, not fear can erase that. I will stand here. I will be acknowledged. And I will not be silent." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, unbidden and raw. "Mom, I didn't realize, I didn't see," she whispered, the weight of complicity and misjudgment settling heavily on her. I handed her the wedding program, still untouched and pristine, my gift to her and a reminder of what had been attempted, invisibility. "Olivia, this was meant to include you and me, together," I said softly. "It is not too late to honor what is real." Ethan's calm facade finally broke. His smile vanished, replaced by a flash of anger and frustration. "This is ridiculous. Everything has been organized perfectly, and you are making a scene." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Ethan. What is ridiculous is your attempt to rewrite a mother's place in her daughter's life. What is disgraceful is your manipulation. But it is done. I am here, and I will be seen. And everyone here knows it now," the relatives murmured, acknowledging the injustice, while Olivia stepped forward, embracing me, her tears wet against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. I didn't realize how wrong I was. I held her close, letting the tension dissolve, but keeping my dignity intact. I had confronted the betrayal, laid out the truth, and demanded recognition without descending into anger or shame. In that moment, the room shifted from orchestrated perfection to something authentic, love, acknowledgement, and a mother's undeniable presence. I glanced around at the symbolic objects, the folder, the programs, the ring box, the photographs. They had served their purpose. I had reclaimed my position, restored my dignity, and held my ground without losing my composure. Ethan, faced with both family witnesses and undeniable evidence, retreated into silence, a man whose manipulation had been exposed. Olivia, once complicit in the exclusion, now faced the weight of her own choices, her gaze filled with regret, but also love rediscovered. Finally, I lifted the small keychain I had carried in my pocket, a tiny trinket from Olivia's childhood, and handed it to her. "This is yours," I said softly. "And I am still yours too, always." In that moment, the climax of years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and tension reached its resolution. I stood tall, my agency restored, my dignity intact, and my love for my daughter recognized and returned. The wedding room, once a stage of exclusion, had become a place of acknowledgement, justice, and reclaimed family bonds. The days after the wedding were quieter than I expected, but quieter didn't mean empty. The storm of confrontation had passed, leaving in its wake a new clarity. Olivia and I spent long, tentative hours talking, not just about the wedding, but about everything that had led us to that fraught moment. She admitted her fear of upsetting Ethan, how she had allowed his influence to eclipse her own instincts, and how she had never intended to fully exclude me, but had been guided by convenience, control, and misplaced loyalty. "I see now, Mom," she said one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "how much I'd been blind. I was trying to please him, and in doing so, I forgot who I was, who I am, and who you've always been for me. Her voice shook. The guilt was heavy, but so was the relief for both of us. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine, and felt the bridge between mother and daughter slowly solidifying once more. Ethan, however, remained distant. The confrontation had left him exposed, his control stripped away, and he no longer attempted to dictate our interactions. There was tension, yes, a recognition that the deception had failed, but it was tempered by the truth now laid bare. The manipulator had been unmasked, and his influence had waned. Olivia, finally free from the carefully constructed narrative, began to reassert her own voice. Our voices, mother and daughter, blending once again. I also realized that my own perspective had shifted. For years, I had measured my worth by the sacrifices I made for others, by the lengths I would go to secure their happiness. I had worked double shifts, mortgaged my home, financed education and apartments, and saved meticulously, all to provide Olivia with the life I could offer. But I had never considered the balance between giving and preserving my own dignity. That balance had been violently tested, and I had emerged with both my love intact and my boundaries clear. I understood now that generosity does not mean surrendering one's self-respect, and that maternal devotion does not obligate one to be treated as an afterthought. The symbolic objects I had carried with me, the photos, the wedding programs, the ring box, even the small keychain from Olivia's childhood, now took on new meaning. They were not merely evidence of betrayal or tools in my confrontation. They were tangible reminders of the life I had nurtured, the legacy of love I had built, and the connection that could withstand deceit. When I handed the keychain to Olivia during the confrontation, it symbolized not only her childhood and our bond, but also the continuity of trust and affection that no manipulation could erase. The photographs, once a quiet testament to sacrifices, now felt celebratory, tangible proof of years of shared memory and enduring love. The $63,000 I had contributed to the wedding, the sum that had initially felt like leverage in Ethan's hands, was no longer a symbol of betrayal. Olivia acknowledged its significance, not as a transactional tool, but as a gesture of love and commitment. We discussed repayment not because it was demanded, but because it represented recognition, accountability, and respect. I realized that money, when entwined with intention, could be reclaimed as an act of love rather than a weapon of exclusion. Family dynamics, too, were clarified in the aftermath. Some relatives who had witnessed the exclusion and the confrontation reached out with support and understanding. They offered congratulations, but also quiet acknowledgement of the truth I had asserted. Others remained distant, unwilling, or unable to reconcile the breach, and I accepted that. True family, I understood, is not solely defined by presence at events or shared lineage. It is defined by mutual respect, recognition, and care. The wedding had forced these lines into sharp relief, allowing me to honor those who supported love and integrity and distance myself from those who did not. I found myself reflecting often on the contrast between the girl Olivia had been and the woman she was becoming. The little girl who had clung to me on rainy nights, who had slept soundly only when I held her close, had grown into a woman capable of error, influenced by external voices, and in need of guidance. But she had also grown into a woman capable of insight, repentance, and renewed connection. That growth, and our renewed bond, was fragile yet real, and it demanded attention, nurturing, and boundaries. In the end, I reclaimed more than my place at the wedding. I reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my peace. I understood that being a mother does not mean being invisible, that love cannot be reduced to money, and that sacrifice must never demand the forfeiture of self-respect. I had confronted betrayal with courage and calm, and in doing so, I preserved not just my relationship with Olivia, but also the integrity of my own life. Walking through my home now, I noticed the symbolic objects I had carried so carefully. The framed photographs, the wedding program I had held, the keychain, the ring box. Each one represents something different: love, resilience, proof of devotion, and the ability to stand firmly in truth. They remind me daily that while betrayal can wound, recognition, dignity, and self-respect can heal and restore. As the days settle into a rhythm, Olivia and I speak more openly, laugh more freely, and share moments that had been delayed by manipulation and miscommunication. I remain vigilant, aware of boundaries and influence, yet my heart feels lighter. I know now that love is not blind compliance, it is respect, acknowledgement, and mutual care. The wedding was a crucible, but through it, I emerged whole. My legacy of love remains intact, my relationship with my daughter revitalized, and my dignity preserved, a testament to the power of truth, courage, and unwavering devotion. My name is Grace, and I'm 71. After everything, decades of sacrifice, sleepless nights, endless giving, I learned a lesson I wish I had known earlier. Love without boundaries can be taken for granted, and generosity without self-respect can be exploited. Being a mother is not about erasing yourself for others. It's about guiding, nurturing, and protecting while still honoring your own worth. I want every mother, every parent, every person who has given their heart and soul for someone else to hear this. Your sacrifices are noble, your love immeasurable, but never forget your dignity. Self-respect is not selfish. It is the foundation that allows your love to flourish without being misused. Standing up for yourself is not betrayal. It is preservation of everything you've built and everything you've given. When I confronted the wedding, when I reclaimed my rightful place, I realized that acknowledgement is not something to beg for. It is something you assert calmly, with clarity and conviction. And in doing so, you teach those you love how to honor you, how to recognize the value you bring, and how to respect the bonds you've nurtured over a lifetime. If you've ever felt unseen, undervalued, or taken for granted, remember, courage and dignity can restore what seems lost. Your presence matters. Your love matters, and your self-worth is non-negotiable. If my story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, reflect on your own boundaries, and remember to honor both love and self-respect. Life is too short to be invisible in the ones we give everything to.